The greeting we give on Yom Kippur is Gemar Hatima Tova. We're asking God to give us a good closing seal in the book of life for happiness and health and peace. And what we're really hoping for and asking God is that God should bless us with a wonderful life. And I want to begin my remarks this evening by sharing a midrash. Adam and Eve sat by the flowing water in the Garden of Eden. And Eve asked the water, "Why? Why did I do it?" But the water had no answer. Adam gazed up at the sunset sky and asked, "Why? Why did I do it?" But the sun didn't answer. It just moved away from their sight. Eve turned to Adam. "We weren't even hungry. Why do we bite into the forbidden fruit? God told us don't eat from the tree of knowledge." Adam shook his head. "I don't know why. We could have had anything we wanted to eat. I just don't know why." But they both did know the reason. They had been curious about the one tree that God had forbidden them to eat from. They knew. And holding each other's hands, they both realized there was nothing more to say. They just needed to wait together. Wait until God told them to finally leave Gan Eden, paradise. Wait until God would show them what life would be like moving forward. So Adam and Eve, they decided to walk together through the garden, hand in hand amidst paradise one last time. Their sadness was so deep as they said goodbye to the plants and animals with this sorrow. Eve said to each one, "I'm so sorry." And Adam would add, "If only we could undo the past." And then the gates to the Garden of Eden started to open. They turned, Adam and Eve, to give one last look at the garden. And then they heard God speak. "You ate from the tree of knowledge. Now there is a lot you will know. You will know fear and grief, and also joy and surprise. You will know pain and hard work, but also dreams, delight, and achievement. You will know good times and bad, and sometimes life will be very hard. For the hard times, I will give you something to help." Eve asked God something from paradise, and Adam added a rainbow or a tree, and God answered, "No, it will come from you. When you feel sorrow or pain, as you do now, I will give you tears so that you can cry. And these tears will lighten your heart and give a glimmer of paradise." And then the Midrash concludes, "And so it is with human beings. Our tears, both bitter and sweet, bring comfort and a little bit of paradise." Tonight, on our holiest of Eves, we know we're not perfect. We are not unblemished. We're not flawless. We know, as the book of Ecclesiastes stated correctly, there is no human being on earth who has done good and hasn't sinned. This is why on Yom Kippur we come to the synagogue, we spend 24 hours fasting, confess, pursue personal and communal repentance, why we seek forgiveness from God and those we've wronged. And that's why we'll strike our hearts in a little bit. We have sinned, we have transgressed, we have caused hurt. We have injured, we have gossiped, we have lost our temper, we have manipulated. We have been implacable, stubborn, proud, unforgiving, jealous, envious, petty. The list goes on. So on Yom Kippur, we hold up the mirror to our inner soul, and we don't look for excuses. We won't blame our background or our parents or our upbringing. During our Day of Atonement, our Yom Kippur, will stand at the closed gates between this world and the next, and we cry. We cry because we don't know how many tomorrows we might be gifted. We cry because all we know is that we possess Hayom. We only possess today. We know, and we cry. But now we are willing to hold up the mirror and ask and answer, if today were our last day, how would God evaluate our life? Did we ultimately succeed in living our life right? Was too much undone or unresolved? If today was our last day, would we feel confident? Do we know for sure what had made our life worthwhile? Have we lived a wonderful life? On our Shabbat before our Yom Kippur, we read from our Torah. We always read about Moses and how Moses learns from God that he will soon die and he has to contemplate his end. Moses must have asked himself, did I have a wonderful life? He must have asked this because his life mission would go unfulfilled. Moses would never reach the promised land. We read from our Torah in that Shabbat Shuvah, God told Moses, the time is coming close for you to die. You will soon lie down with your ancestors. When we read our Torah, God offered Moses no reassurance that Moses had succeeded in his life's task. In fact, the opposite is the case. God told Moses, in the future, the Jewish people will chase after false gods, will neglect the holy laws, will forget their covenant with God. Imagine what Moses realized. Even after all the plagues and miracles in Egypt, all of God's signs and wonders, God's outstretched hand liberating us from Egyptian bondage, the miracle of the sea parting, receiving the heavenly bread to sustain us in our wanderings in the wilderness, receiving God's commandments at Mount Sinai amidst the thunder. And yet, with all that, God told Moses the Jewish people would forget and ignore what they had learned. Moses must have thought to himself, if his life had been worth living at all. All his work, his life mission, might not even continue. Everything Moses did might not have the end result he worked so hard to achieve. Moses, knowing he was going to die, he must have asked himself, did I have a wonderful life? But we read from our Torah that Moses came to the decision at the end of his life, the decision that we all want for ourselves. Because Moses understood at the end he had lived a wonderful life. It wasn't always easy. There was much unachieved. Much Moses could have done differently. But in the end, Moses knew he had lived a wonderful life. It's why Moses managed to find the inner calm that comes with knowing his life journey was a meaningful journey. And that's why within our Torah we read that Moses doesn't ever challenge God's final decree. Instead, Moses hands over his leadership power to Joshua. Moses came to understand, the rabbis say, that what matters in life isn't whether our work succeeds, but whether we perform with integrity. The rabbis teach Moses understood what matters isn't whether we find out all the answers, but rather that we seek to understand. What matters isn't whether we perfect the world, but that we treat the world as if it could be perfected. The rabbis say Moses is calm, his knowledge. This all teaches he lived a wonderful life. It came from Moses realizing that what ultimately matters is that we know for ourselves we tried our best. The Talmud, when considering this story on Moses, notes that when we die, we will face our Maker, and we will be asked 6 questions. Did you have integrity in your work? Did you make time for Torah study and sacred living? Did you care for your family? Did you try to make the world better? Did you welcome new ideas? And did you have reverence for your Maker? The rabbis are explicit. Our Judaism teaches that our task on earth isn't to be wealthy or famous or powerful. Our task is to be honest, studious, caring, supportive, optimistic, inquisitive, loving. To live a wonderful life doesn't matter so much what we do with our life, but how we do it. How do we create for ourselves a wonderful life? A clergy friend of mine showed me an app she had placed on her phone. She called it her Wonderful Life Reminder. And the app, I see the kids grabbing the iPhones. You can look it up after services, okay? The app is based on a Buddhist tradition that teaches that one should contemplate their death 5 times a day in order to bring happiness to themselves. So this app, 5 times a day, randomly, a window pops up. It pops up on my friend's phone, and it's the same message. Reminder, you're going to die. Click here for a wisdom quote. Now, my friend admitted to me that sometimes she just ignores the pop-up prompt. Sometimes there are times when she doesn't need or she doesn't want to remember that she's going to die. But other times she finds that this app provides her greatly needed perspective. One of her favorite experiences with this app was when she was aimlessly cyber shopping on her phone. And while she's doing this, all of a sudden she gets her pop-up message. Remember, you are going to die. Click here for wisdom quote. And she clicked to get her wisdom quote, and then she read, life is too short to be lived badly. And with this prompt, she decided not to buy the purse she didn't need, but instead she chose to call her husband just to say hello. Another time, my friend was in a rush when getting into an elevator. She noticed that someone at a bit of a distance was coming towards the elevator. She took a deep breath. She held the open door button for what seemed to her like a longer time than was needed, and then let the door close as the other person got in. And there was no acknowledgement of gratitude. The person said nothing to her. The person simply stared away. And when they arrived on the first floor, the person rushed out without even glancing at my friend. Then right after my friend walked out of the elevator, her pop-up came. Reminder, you're going to die. Click here for wisdom quote. And she clicked for her quote, and she took a screenshot to keep it for herself. And it reads, what I regret most in my life are failures of kindness. What a great app. It can help with confronting our mortality, readjusting our mindset. And tonight with Yom Kippur, I believe we're ritually all possessing this app. Because with our Yom Kippur observance, we have assured that we cannot be in denial of death. We liturgically recite the verses that none of us in the long run make it out alive. Sometimes in our lives we have unwelcome reminders that our days are limited, and we have greater urgency to secure our wonderful life before it's too late. The philosopher Kierkegaard wrote, "It takes religious courage to rejoice." Now, I'm not so sure it takes so much courage as much as willingness. A willingness to appreciate what you have had and have versus what you haven't had and may never receive. Those of us who are baseball fans, many who are not, are familiar with Lou Gehrig. Yes, a Yankee. I still admire him. I admire him because Gehrig was perhaps the best first baseman of all time. And beyond his extraordinary achievements on the playing field, he was well known for his humility, his kind-heartedness, and his generosity. He was nicknamed the Iron Horse after playing in 2,130 consecutive games, a record that held for 56 years. In 1939, 2 weeks after being diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. How'd I do, doctors? Did I get it? No? All right, I'm going to say ALS from now on, all right? But we know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. Why? Because Lou Gehrig delivered his famous farewell speech. He came before 62,000 admiring, teary-eyed fans. He stood on the infield of Yankee Stadium, flanked by old and contemporary teammates, and his speech concluded famously, "I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. And I might have been given a bad break, but I've got an awful lot to live for." Lou Gehrig saw himself not as a mere victim of a form of paralysis. He saw himself as a symbol of hope for thousands of sufferers who suffered the same disorder. 2 years later, Lou Gehrig died, 17 days short of his 38th birthday. And since his death, we commonly refer to this as Lou Gehrig's disease. Ron Janka, he was a resident of Houston, Texas. He recently died after a 3-year battle with Lou Gehrig's disease. Now, I and many others know about Ron because of Matthew West's song, "Wonderful Life." Ron was a fan of Matthew West's music, and when he entered hospice, he reached out to Matthew to thank him for one of his other songs, "Strong Enough," which Ron asked his nurses to play every morning when he felt blessed to have woken up. Matthew listened to Ron's story. He was so moved he wanted to meet him, but because of the pandemic restrictions, they had to settle for a meeting via Zoom. And Matthew thought he would be able to bring Ron some comfort. But when the virtual meeting took place, Matthew quickly realized that he was being comforted by the hospice patient who was soon to die and not the other way around. Ron encouraged Matthew to keep sharing his music because it gave his fans so much support and strength. Matthew describes how Ron spurred him on, cheering for him as he was on the path of his own life's race. And this meeting significantly impacted Matthew because while Ron didn't know it, Matthew had been deeply depressed. He had been very discouraged at this particular time. He was overburdened by the rigors of touring amidst the height of the pandemic. He felt like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders, just like so many other people did amidst the COVID plague. Ron didn't know it, but his seeing past his battle with Lou Gehrig's disease to encourage Matthew made a huge difference. And a few weeks later, when Ron passed away, Matthew soon wrote a song about Ron. It's entitled "Wonderful Life." Some of the lyrics read, "Ron from Houston, Texas spent 3 years fighting ALS. If you knew all that he's been through, you'd hardly say he's blessed. But smiling through a phone call, he said, "Let me tell you, friend, this life ain't always wonderful, but what a wonderful life it's been. I'll send you flying high, I'll bring you to your knees. It's the heartbreak and the happiness and everything between. It's the laugh until it hurts, and it's the hurt until you cry. Can't have one without the other. It's how you know that you're alive. In this broken and beautiful, gone mad and magical, awfully wonderful life, it's a mountain and a valley, it's a cradle and a grave, it's a blessing and a battle, and it's on any given day. It's messy and imperfect, it's a thief and it's a gift. Yeah, this life ain't always wonderful, but what a wonderful life it is." When I first heard Wonderful Life and subsequently the story of Ron, his battle with Lou Gehrig's disease, I felt inspired, and I'm sure it came to mind for a lot of you, to rewatch Frank Capra's Wonderful Life. Let's admit it, right? It's a kosher movie. It's okay, right? I know some people think of it as a Christmas movie, but I really understand not the film just as kosher, but glatt kosher, super kosher, because it's the perfect story for Yom Kippur. After all, it tells the story of George Bailey, who grows weak when he sees his life as a failure. He doesn't value his work. He's given up on his dreams, and now he owes a lot of money. He can't even keep what he has. George feels as if he has no longer the strength to go on. He wanted to die. He declared that the world would be better off if he had never been born. And because it's a Frank Capra movie, George's guardian angel intervenes, and George gets to see the world in truth, what it would have been like if he hadn't been born. He wouldn't have been there to save his brother from drowning. He wouldn't have been there to prevent a pharmacist from sending poison to a customer by mistake. He wouldn't have been there to marry his wife, have his children. He wouldn't have been there to provide loans to help other families purchase their first homes. George awakens from this vision of this alternative reality with a renewed understanding of the importance of his life. He recognizes how much does indeed depend on him. On Yom Kippur, we are all like George Bailey. And mindful of our mortality, the short time we have to impact life hayom today, we have to think about the lessons that George learned. We should be nice to everyone. And there's better than a good chance that if we've been good to others, they'll support us in our time of need. That's how George secured his wonderful life. In real life, I read the story of someone who is very similar to George Bailey. Joel was tired. He lived alone. He was long ago divorced. He wasn't so involved with his children's lives. They were all grown. Joel was nearing retirement. He had to go to a funeral of a colleague who died suddenly from a heart attack, what they call a widowmaker heart attack. The funeral was crowded. Family and friends each spoke. They recalled stories. They made tributes. And as the time wore on, Joel thought to himself, I wish I knew my colleague better. He sounds like such a great guy. And then all of a sudden, Joel's sitting there, he had a panic attack. He began to think to himself, who would speak at my funeral? Who would come? What would they say? Because Joel knew he had worked long days. He had been coming home to an empty house. He knew his neighbors only by sight. He never actually met them. And after his colleague's funeral and his silent panic attack, Joel kept telling himself when he got into his car, before it's too late, before it's too late. And as Joel, now nearing retirement, what did he choose to do? He started to come home earlier. He went outside his home. He met his neighbors. He greeted the children as they rode their bikes or walked their dogs. Joel started to offer to help his neighbors with a loan of a tool or to give a hand. He smiled a lot more. He became a good neighbor. And after Joel retired, he became even more present, ready to help, even more friendly. He had changed his life by simply becoming a good, attentive neighbor. And by changing his life, he acknowledges he changed himself. And Joel says he no longer worries about dying. He doesn't think about his funeral. He's happy. He's living a wonderful life. Even when life isn't wonderful, we can live a wonderful life. We do this by meaningfully connecting with each other. In this way, we improve our life and the other. The philosopher Martin Buber, he famously coined the term, many of you know it, the I-thou relationship. Buber saw the meeting between I and thou as the most important aspect of the human experience, because it's in real relationships that we become fully human, that we make for a wonderful life. The I-thou relationship requires our intentionality. We make ourselves fully present, fully accessible. We fully manifest our love and kindness to those who matter most to us. We can change the trajectory of our lives and the lives of others when we actively make ourselves available, offering and receiving all the good attributes we value. We create for ourselves a wonderful life when we become, as my Bubby, my grandmother of blessed memory, would often say, we become a mensch. What's a mensch? A mensch is the kind of person who consistently manifests admirable traits. Admirable traits like decency, kindness, honesty, trustworthiness, respect, benevolence, compassion, altruism. On Yom Kippur, we acknowledge that nobody's perfect. We are all a mixture of strength and frailties, virtues and faults. But what secures our wonderful life is that we keep working at making sure our positive traits far outweigh the appearance of the negative ones. I want to conclude from a powerful illustration. I talked in Rosh Hashanah, the series Chicken Soup for the Soul, which I've been blessed to have a few pieces published in. My reward is I get all the books. There's a lot of stories in these books, but every so often you find a story that's a real gem. And there was this book that was put out of teachers' stories. And I want to just share this powerful illustration, how it is that ultimately we secure our wonderful life. A first grade teacher, as the Thanksgiving holiday approached, assigned her class to draw a picture of something for which they are thankful. The teacher thought that most of the kids would draw turkeys or families or gifts. And she's right. She was right. That's what the students' art showed. But the teacher had one student, Douglas. Douglas was different. He lived a sad home life. He was frail. He was unhappy. During recess, Douglas stuck close to the teacher's side. One could only guess at the troubles behind his sad eyes. Douglas's picture also stood out. He drew only a picture of an empty hand and nothing else. The other children tried to guess at this intriguing image. Was it a farmer's hand because farmers had turkeys? Was it a police hand because they protect and serve? Was it the hand of God? After a discussion, the class went on to other assignments. The teacher later bent down and whispered to Douglas, "Whose hand was it?" And Douglas looked at her, surprised by the question. "It's yours, because you're my teacher." And at this, the teacher recalled all the times she had taken Douglas's hand and walked with him, saying, "Let's go outside, Douglas. or showing him how to hold a pencil, or saying, "Let's do this together." Douglas was thankful for his teacher's hand. She wiped away a tear. She continued her work. She was living a wonderful life, and she would never forget when her hand reached out to Douglas all those times. That's when she became a teacher. We have 24 hours until the gates close. Let's use this time to shed the tears that will lighten our heart, give a glimmer of paradise. Let's pursue Moses' calm, the calm that came with knowing that he had lived a wonderful life because he had tried his best. Let's accept the reality that life is too short to be lived badly. And in the end, we don't want to regret our failures of kindness. Let's all rededicate ourselves to fully manifest our love and kindness to those who matter most to us. Gemar Hatima Tova, may God help us to ultimately know that while life may not have always been wonderful, it was a wonderful life.